If my people, Bible reading, part 153. This is going to be a doozy. Boy, did I get a lot of emails wanting me to explain what I've done before about the truth, what's in every major newspaper, what's in every major Christian organization today, and that is just point blank the churches. One of them I was very familiar with and got all the details from is from the United Methodist Church, and then the Presbyterians, the Episcopalians that started allowing this back in around 2005. 2006, they put it into their doctrines and they put it in their creeds and they put it into their written rules. So I'm not talking out of line, but just catch what I'm about to say. We're starting the book of Daniel now, and back in Isaiah chapter 39. Let me quickly read that to you. This was brought up. Chapter 39, verse 7. And they shall take of your sons who shall come forth out from you, which you shall father, and they shall, means leaders, people taking over your life in these last days, they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. Now that was for going about what's going to happen in Babylon, which is also accentuated by a 10,000% today. And then Hezekiah said to Isaiah, Hezekiah is getting all this information, and Hezekiah thought it was a grand, fantastic idea, by the way. That's how stupid that guy was. So when we're in Isaiah, now let's go to chapter 56, and you can put this on pause anytime you want to keep up with me. Chapter 56, we'll start with verse 3. And do not let the son of the foreigner speak, he who joins himself to Yahweh, saying, surely Yahweh separates me from his people. Now there's if you're going to be grafted in and you're going to hear and obey, you're going to be a saved individual, one of the 12 tribes. You're going to be grafted into those tribes. The foreigner can't say, well, it doesn't account to me. I don't have to follow those rules. The answer is yes, you do. Everybody who's grafted in follows the same Torah. There's no such thing as Noah, Noatic, commandments like, oh, you can follow these, but you don't have to follow those. Don't listen to those crazy people telling you that, because it's the synagogue of Satan, pure and simple. I'm just reading the word right out of the word. I don't add to it and put magic to it and put mystical stuff to it. I don't do that. All right, verse 4. So he says, Yahweh to the eunuchs who keep my Aleph Toph. That's he's talking about Yeshua. My Sabbaths and choose things I am pleased with, and take hold of my covenant. Hear and obey the Torah. There it is. I will give them my house and my walls, a hand and a name better than the sons, than the daughters. I will give them an everlasting name which shall not be cut off. Because a eunuch is a person who is cut off. Throughout thousands of years. Eunuchs means many things, but one of them is they're usually intellectual, they're usually smart, but they're usually kept from propagating. They're kept from marrying. They're kept from being with a woman and a woman with a man. But there's a reason for it. They're being dedicated to a king or to someone in charge of them, to Yahweh themselves. They've made that choice themselves. I'm going to dedicate my life. So that doesn't mean as a Catholic you can't go out there and marry. That you could see what happens when you're supposed to be marrying these thousands of priests and they're not marrying. Oh, yeah, we're seeing what's going on in that church because they did not read the Bible. Verse 6, and the sons of the foreigner who join themselves to Yahweh to serve him and to love the name of Yahweh, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, to be his servants, everyone who keeps from defiling my Shabbats and takes hold of my covenant. So there is the promise. Now, Isaiah is all about Yeshua. So you would think later on, well, will Yeshua say this when he's in his earthly body, which means the new covenant? Will he mention this since he wrote it in Isaiah? He wrote it in the old covenant. So now we're in the book of Daniel. So everything talked about, Hezekiah got that information. Now Daniel, he's a eunuch. So right from the beginning, he's a eunuch, and it mentions it. So Back then, they didn't use the word gay. Now, in Sodom and Gomorrah, I don't know what they called each other. But today, here's what we call them. And they have called themselves this. This is the name they call themselves. So I'm not slamming anybody by what I'm about to say. Just listen to what I'm saying. This is in major newspapers. The left side radical whatever politics is joined into this, and they love this stuff. They love stirring it up with the people on the right hand side. There are lesbians, there are bisexuals, there are gays, there are, back in the 1890s, gay used to mean fun-loving people, but okay. There are transgenders, there are queers. Remember getting in trouble for calling somebody a queer back in the 60s and 70s? Now they openly want to be called queer. There, go figure. There's pansexuals, intersexed agenders. Heard that one? It's brand new. Asexuals. There is Beastialities. That's an organization. Beastialities. They believe in having only, don't have sex with women, have sex with animals. It's okay. And then there's UMBRO and NAMBLA. So the LBGT, which went around for 5 or 10 years, is now blown all the water because the transgenders hate the gays because they say you're transgender, you love having sex with men and women, and you don't tell your wife about it, so you're a liar. And they hate each other. All these people, the queers, the pansexuals hate so-and-so, the bisexuals hate so-and-so, the lesbians hate the other groups. The intersexed agenders are calling them all liars. The asexuals are saying make up your mind. The beastiality is say stay away from all of them. And then there's UMBRO. Back when I worked investigations and criminal investigations during the 70s and 80s, I locked up a lot of people involved in UMBRO because they were committing horrible crimes. Now, front page news, and they had their own magazine. UMBRO, United Men Boys Resistance Organization. Do you remember wearing clothes, or your children or people you knew wear clothes in the 80s and 90s and it said UMBRO on the clothes? Remember that? Every dime that you spent on UMBRO clothes went to the queer movement. Okay? Try that in newspapers, magazines, libraries. It's there, folks. I'm not making this up. And they were supported by NAMBLA. Well, who's NAMBLA? The National American Men Boy Lovers Association, saying that everyone in the United States has a right to live in Sodom and Gomorrah, and they even laugh about it because they say Sodom and Gomorrah is coming back. And we have a right for any child over the age of 5, that child should be able to make up their own decision. And that parents have nothing to do with it. That's the world we live in. And you say, well, people that don't have children these days are terrible. Really? Maybe that's a good idea not to have any kids these days. So your LBGTQPIABUN association, back then they didn't use any of those words when the Bible was written. It was called eunuchs. So, even until the Crusades, kings and queens and a king would go off to fight the war in Crusades for the name of Jesus, and for whatever purpose, usually to make money. Money's always involved. And then he was, I got to make sure my wife is behaving herself, so he would put some devices on her, so she had, it kept her from being very clean. It's like, ugh. And if he didn't do that, he would hire eunuchs to keep an eye on her and to tend to her needs, thinking that the eunuchs, gays, whatever you want to call them, don't like women. Wrong. Some of the things that these people are attacking each other with in massive numbers today, hating each other, but they'll vote against a certain political person. They hate that guy, but they hate each other even more. Wait till they have no one left to fight except themselves. Boy, that's going to be blood in the streets. And UMBRO and NAMBLA, still very popular. So Daniel. Let's get to the word here. Daniel was a eunuch. Now, that doesn't mean, back in those days, one of the primary purposes was you take a young man as smart as he was, people probably figured out, and you don't want him married and have a family. You want him devoting all of his attention span, his intellect, and everything to a certain king or a court or an organization such as the Babylonian governmental processes, which Daniel stayed, by the way, until he died. He never returned back to the promised land. He died somewhere in Babylon. There's no history of it. He's just gone. So to understand, Daniel wasn't sexually immoral. It has nothing to do with it. It's just a title they put for all these people doing all these things. Like I said, the information I just gave you, all these 11 different kinds of people with 11 different ways of doing something. They don't agree with each other at all. It's just a title. But having said that, let's go to Matthew. And if the churches would read this from the pulpits, if the pastors and ministers and the Messianics and the Hebrew roots and everybody would read this, and it's okay to stray a little away from the weekly information of data that you're only supposed to read according to the Orthodox Jews, the rabbi. It's okay. You can read something else. You're going to be okay. How about reading the entire Bible from beginning to end? How about that? And we'll call that. How about taking the first 7 books and then taking the entire New Testament and add all that Torah together, and you got a bunch of Torah. Bunch. Now we're up to 1,050 plus another 250 that haven't been erased because Yeshua took away certain things such as temple sanctification and so forth. You are the temple today. So there's your Torah to study. There's your Torah portions. Okay? But let's just read this. If this was just read here, what I just read in Isaiah, it would solve probably 90% of the problems dealing with how do you answer someone who wants to be openly gay and do anything they want with their bodies. So we go to chapter 19, Matthew 19, and let's read it. Let's start with verse 10. His disciples said to him, "If such is the difficulty between a husband and a wife, is it not worthwhile to take a wife?" He's talking about, Yeshua saying, if someone does something sexually bad in a marriage and somebody divorces another because of it, Yeshua, I will forgive them. I don't want that to happen. I want forgiveness to take between the two, but I will forgive them if they do it. So the disciples say, well, why marry? Well, there's a reason for it. That's one of the Torah commands in the Old Testament is to repopulate. Verse 11. But he said to them, not every man can apply this word to himself, but only he to whom it is given. For there are eunuchs, there's that eunuch word, and you remember, Yeshua wrote Isaiah. Okay, so he's bringing it up. Go back to Isaiah to read what I just gave you. For there are eunuchs who were born thus from their mother's womb. They were born that way. Remember how many people the Christians say, you were born, you made that decision because somebody messed. It's impossible. Well, there it says right there. It says it right there. Born from the mother's womb. And, there's an and there are eunuchs who were made that way. Made that way by castration, by a man manipulating the ego and the mind of a young man or a young girl. Absolutely. Sexual preference and all fighting. Boy, this is exciting. I think I'll keep doing this. Or you just give up and you do that kind of behavior. And there are eunuchs who are made by eunuchs of themselves for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. He who is able to understand it, let him understand. In other words, if you were made that way, you were born that way, you made that decision that way, Yeshua is saying, just don't commit the sin. Just live, but don't commit the sin of being that. That's what he's saying. See you next.